So here we are coming to you live from beautiful downtown planet Earth. This is Mushtaq Ali and
Nor Kyle.
Coming to you from the nine-sided circle.
Yeah, we're doing the nine-sided circle thing.
We're doing the nine-sided circle thing. And tonight we're going to be talking about relationships and the work, which is an exciting topic, usually a topic that brings fear and trepidation to the hearts of men and women everywhere, also dogs, because you can have a relationship with your dog. And sometimes it's a good dog, sometimes it's a bad dog. But before that, we have to go through our usual thing of saying, hey, if you're listening to us on YouTube, thanks for listening. Give us a thumbs up if you like what you hear tonight. And if you don't, give us a thumbs down because we want to know. I would just be pleased as punch if you subscribe to our channel. And there will be door prizes. They won't be worth anything, but there will be door prizes for subscribers. What you will do with the door, who knows? But yeah, so hit that subscribe button, hit that silly little bell so that you can be notified every time that we put some content up, which is at least once a week. And we will be delighted to entertain you. So with that out of the way, here we are, and we're going to talk about one of the most important aspects of the work, which is being in relationship with other people. Most importantly, being in relationship with somebody with whom you are deeply and intimately connected. Mr. Gurdjieff said, if you want to grow, get in a relationship. If you want to grow quickly, get in a relationship with somebody who you are fundamentally incompatible with, which I always found interesting and probably true in certain ways. The thing about our relationships, and there are many kinds of relationship, of course. They don't have to just be romantic that we're talking about here. Community relationships are just as important as romantic relationships. And if you are a member of the Way of the Nomad, we were talking about that last night. Community is the basic unit of growth for human beings, not the lone alchemist or the lone dervish sitting in a cave somewhere. It is a community of people working towards the same intent.
I would say they're not even necessarily mutually exclusive, different types of relationships.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, if you are in a romantic relationship with somebody who you're not friends with, you may have problems.
Setting yourself up for problems.
Yes, or at least setting yourself up for quick growth.
Yes, thank you, Gurdjieff.
So, some spiritual paths like to not have relationships. They like things like celibacy. They like isolation. They like turning your back on everything physical. The good news is this is not one of those paths. And we come from a tradition that encourages relationship, that encourages deep relationship. Yes, some areas had things like arranged marriages and stuff like that. Sometimes that works out well, sometimes it works out not so well, just like every other form of marriage. But we have some examples of relationship most classic of which is Jalaluddin Rumi and Shamsi Tabriz, who were, their meeting was a catalyst for both of them to complete themselves. And they completed themselves in a profound, intimate relationship with each other that was so deep and so intense that Rumi's students freaked out over it, and eventually ended up murdering Shams, according to what everybody says. So that's how powerful relationship can be. But if you want to see what we talk about there, get a copy of Rumi's Divani Shamsi Tabriz, which is the book of poems of Shams. And the tradition in Divan poetry is that the writer works his name into the last couplet. And instead of Rumi working his own name into the last couplet of each of the poems in the Divan, he worked Shams's name into it. And he basically lost his ego in his connection with Shams, who was both his friend and intimate and teacher, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy asks, yes. What does Nancy ask?
React to his students after that, after they murdered Shams?
It was interesting because the loss of Shams was the last step in Rumi's own transformation. He became almost the Arabic word is madzub, which means God intoxicated. It also means crazy. He was so lost in his connection with Shams that he didn't have time to be angry with his students. Mm-hmm. He didn't stop teaching them. And it was after that that he developed the turn, interestingly enough. He didn't have the turn before Shams was murdered. So I kind of look at that as a mystery that's probably beyond my pay grade. Another example out of Eastern lore is the tale of Layla and Majnun, which is it's sort of a Sufi version of Romeo and Juliet. Layla and Majnun are young lovers. Layla is promised to some dude in marriage, and she's forced to go marry him. And Majnun is so lost in her that he basically wanders into the wilderness and is completely effaced in his love for Layla. That's all he sees. You know, he doesn't see a tree, he sees Layla. He doesn't see a tiger, he sees Layla. That's all that exists for him. And of course, this is a metaphor for the soul's yearning for the divine and all of that. And it's a tragedy, but it's considered very, very beautiful. And it is in its own way. So what, you may ask, does this have to do with us? And if you aren't asking, please ask, what does this have to do with us? The answer, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, somebody asked, what does this have to do with us? Let me tell you. Relationship is one of the most important keys, or one of the most important ways of developing the single most important quality to emerging as a true human adult and waking up. And that is conscience and interconnectedness, the thing that we call empathy. You cannot be truly human without conscience. Conscience cannot be imposed from the external. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can give you a conscience. They can give you rules. They can threaten to do terrible things to you if you break the rules, but that's not a conscience. Conscience is the ability to connect to this with the subjectivity of another and understand that connection as real and profound.
Realizing the depth of that.
The depth, yes. Yeah. When you look in the eyes of your beloved and you see that there's an entire universe of life behind them, you see that there are the hopes, the dreams, the beginning, the middle, the end of that life, that they are a rich universe unto themselves, and you get to share a little bit of that with them. This begins to develop conscience, because when you do that, you feel with them rather than just with yourself. Does that make sense? Am I waxing too poetic here, or not poetic enough?
I think that esoteric or inner work, it can easily become very self-centered and actually selfish. We sit and study and we think that we're doing this for the world, but we end up with alienated families and so on. So I think what you're saying is spot on, very important.
Yes.
Yes. So there's a story from the life of the Prophet Muhammad about one of his companions who was really, really into doing his practices. And he would fast, and he would meditate, and he would pray, and he would do this to the exclusion of everything else. He wasn't working. He was like, doing nothing. And the guy's wife comes to the Prophet and she says, oh Prophet of God, I have this problem. Your companion here is not taking care of his family. We're hungry. We're cold because there is no wood for the fire, and me and the kids only have one robe to share between us because he's always busy praying and fasting. Mm. The Prophet calls him in and says, look, your wife has rights over you. Your children have rights over you, and your body has rights over you. If you neglect these things for your practice, it is as if you were not doing your practice. So, and I'm ad-libbing here because my translation is not as good as it could be, but basically the message that he gave him was, make loving your wife and caring for your family and keeping your body healthy part of your practice. It's as important as your prayers. And it's true. And in cultures that don't do that, we see what happens. Do you know what happens?
What happens?
People don't grow up.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So the worst place for this in the world, in my experience that I've ever been, is Saudi Arabia. Mm. Because men and women are kept strictly segregated from each other from early childhood through adulthood. and they don't have a chance to develop those connections. Therefore, the men tend to view the women as objects, and the women tend to view themselves as objects. And this is terrible because I'm going to tell you something radical here. Men do not, or male children do not mature into adult men without interaction with women. Even if you're gay, right? Because you had to have a mother. But basically, for us males, if we had had our druthers, we would still be living in trees. You know, we would jump down and gobble up bananas and fruit and the occasional, you know, swamp rat or whatever. It is our interaction with women that motivated us to build civilization, that motivated us to make life easier for them, that gave us a connection outside of ourselves that we could care about. And children who do not have this experience tend to not mature. Women have a slightly different path because they can get pregnant. And that forces a certain kind of maturity on them regardless of interacting with anybody else, because they're interacting with potential babies. Radical and frightening, yes?
So do you feel like that starts early on?
I think that it does. I mean, you know, I can remember as a child because, you know, I had lots of contact with both male and female cousins because we all lived in the same place. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up around them, and it was like I was constantly learning, this is how you behave towards this person that is so radically different from you, and yet so incredibly interesting. And this is not a popular belief, or it's not a belief. It's a concept. It's a model, but it's not a popular model right now, and it's not politically correct for anybody, as far as I can tell. But well, I have yet to see it disproven.
Yeah, and I think we're deliberately generalizing, but we don't mean to you know, overgeneralize. It's just that there are nuances that have to do with the way our communities have I lost my thought, sorry.
Our communities have isolated themselves from each other. Is that where you were going?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Here in the United States of America, we have a similar thing now where young men and women have no way to connect with each other like they did even in my generation. Mm. You know, you meet a member of the interesting sex, not in a social situation for the most part, but from an online dating app, for God's sakes. And then you awkwardly meet, and maybe you hook up. I've rarely ever seen any kind of meaningful relationship come out of these sorts of things. And then you wander off and wonder what's wrong. God, I sound old-fashioned. I feel like I should be out on my porch shaking my fist at the kids.
Do you have any idea why there are cultures that have men separated from women as an ideal?
Basically, it has to do with the desire to propagate the male genetic line. And the only way to effectively do that is control breeding access to the females of the culture. to put it bluntly, to be the anthropologist.
Yep.
The nice thing is not all cultures are like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, Western culture is definitely like that, whether it wants to admit it or not.
Yeah.
And what that does is that it creates one gender as object. And the entire Judeo-Christian world is all about whose property the woman is. And this is not conducive to real relationship.
Well, I'd say the most extreme Western example is actually monasteries, which are not about controlling women.
Monasteries are about controlling access to women, which is to say there is none.
Well, yeah.
Unless the monks sneak over the wall, which happens more often than not.
Mm-hmm.
Or the monks fight over who gets to go and take confession at the convent down the road. And that is to say that when you don't have healthy relationships, you develop pathological relationships.
So let's talk more about healthy relationships.
Let's talk more about healthy relationships. Healthy relationships start when you perceive the other as subject. Does that, can you make sense out of that? Do you understand what I mean when I say that? Do I need to explain that more deeply? I mean, that's where it gets a little esoteric, but
yes, please explain more, Mushtaq.
Okay, so when you see a person and that person is like a chair, they're an object that exists to you that may be convenient, may be inconvenient. You might like it. I like the chair I'm sitting on right now. I'm very fond of this chair. But it's a thing. Human beings are not things. They're not nouns, they're verbs. And you must perceive the human being not as object, but as subject, which means as a beingness with inwardness. That what you see inside of yourself is mirrored in that other person, that they feel as deeply as you feel, and that they can experience happiness, sadness, joy, pain, sorrow, loss, love, you know, all of these things, that they are capable of experiencing that, and that your behavior towards them will affect them. My behavior towards my chair does not affect my chair emotionally. It does not affect my chair's inwardness because my chair has no inwardness. My behavior towards Jeff or Kyle will affect them. You know, if I act in a way towards you, Jeff, that is that treats you like a piece of furniture, like, oh, you're either convenient to me or you're not, and if you're not, I'll ignore you, that's going to hurt you. Am I getting closer to you understanding what I'm meaning?
Yes. Yeah. It's treating someone like a person and not like an inanimate object.
Yes. And treating someone like a person means that you experience their inwardness, and their inwardness matters to you. Sometimes that's easier than others. It's like you and I have been friends for years. It's easy for your inwardness to matter to me. Kyle and I have been friends for years. It's easy for her inwardness to matter for me. It's much harder if I'm walking down the street and somebody tries to sell me some cheap jewelry on the street corner and I ignore them and they spend the next 5 minutes as I'm walking away screaming at me.
True story.
True story, yeah, just the other day. And I had to struggle to remember that that person was an inwardness too. So, one of the things that this does is it gives you an entirely different way to solve problems. Because you know, the only way to not have a problem with human beings is for there to be none. Even sitting alone in a room, you can have problems with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you put somebody else in there, there will inevitably be problems. Children handle those problems by trying to jockey so that they get what they want out of it. Adults in relationship handle those problems by resolving it in a way that each person can be at peace with the other. Does that make sense? And what that means is you have to get your own ego out of the way.
Any thoughts or questions thus far? No? Okay.
God, everybody's quiet. Either we're doing a really, really good job or a really bad one.
If I can say something,
Yes.
I think that what you're talking about is very fundamental in all human relations, because I've noticed through just self-analysis that a lot of times if there's a problem, it's a resistance within me that rears its head and creates discord. Because if I'm just secure in what I want to express, I'm losing my my vocabulary a little bit here. It's almost like I feel that as humans, we are supposed to constantly create, we're supposed to give and receive love. And it's, when we're not clear about that, we're not using our personalities to express that, that's often when discord is created. So if somebody has a problem, we should be able to see that and receive that in that spirit, I think. I think that's where you're going with this, maybe.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm going. And that's incredibly important. And I want to get to that. Mustaqim has a question here, which is also important.
Yes.
Yeah.
He asks, how about quote unquote bad relationship? How to approach it and when to stay or leave?
Okay, so let me get that first and then get back to board. When you have a bad relationship, the first thing you need to do is ask yourself, what is making it bad? Is it bad because you are treating your partner as a thing? Is it bad because your partner is treating you as a thing? If it's the first, if you are treating your partner as a thing, that means that you want to be right, you want to be in control, you want them to agree with you, you want them to have your viewpoint instead of their own, then you deal with that by dealing with you. If it's the other way around, it's a little bit more problematic because you can't force another person to grow. And you can hold your own space and you can demand that they treat you as a human being, as an individual. And if they don't, then it's time to, pack up and go. And that's sometimes not very easy because sometimes there's children involved and all of this kind of other stuff. But it is toxic to stay in a relationship that is hurting you. And that will hurt you. When the other person does not see you as human, that hurts. So back to board.
Yes. So talking about really.
And we will come back to that again, Mustaqim, also. But
yes.
Yeah, so it is our job basically on this planet to be good, loving human beings who are witnesses to the divine in each other, to put it bluntly. And when we do that, life gets better. I'm going to use an example of Kyle and I because we work together a lot. And inevitably, because we're both human, one of us might do something that is not okay with the other in some way. Now, there's lots of ways that those could be handled. But consistently, because we're heavily into this work, the way that we handle those things when something comes up is we listen to each other. And we try and hear each other from each other's perspective. Mm-hmm. And we talk things out and we find how we've hurt the other. I mean, Kyle might say to me, you did this thing and it made me feel bad. And if I was stuck in my crap, I would be going, that's not my fault. I didn't make you feel bad. No, you're just being blonde or something. But if I'm actually being awake, I will hear that she experienced pain. And she's important to me. So if I get that message, I experience the same pain. Mm. It reflects on me. And of course, I want to make it better. And I want to make it better more than my ego wants to be right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so far, knock on wood, we have managed to resolve any kind of personality quirks that we have, and there might be one or two, in ways that have allowed us to be very, very effective at the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and I found that through practicing those skills with Mushtak, it's become easier for me to practice them with other people, other people that I care about who may not be as well equipped to go at this work proactively, but because I'm able to set the example, they feel safer to take those steps themselves as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different responses. Somebody says to me, oh, I'm hurt because of this thing that you said. I can either go, here, let me hurt you more. Mm-hmm. Or I can go, here, let me see if I can fix that because I don't want you to hurt.
Yeah.
And there's probably a reconciling force in there as well. And that comes out of making that connection of, I don't want you to hurt.
Yeah, and it's not about, developing a codependency where each of you are like internalizing the other's feelings in a way that isn't productive. It's more about like, empathy with a sense of self-responsibility as well.
Nancy said something here.
Okay. Nancy says, sometimes I've gotten things to get better by keeping myself from expecting things to go badly. I've only pulled this off a couple times, but it did happen. I wasn't expecting things to go well. If I wasn't expecting things to go well, I would just refuse to expect. Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting things to go well. I would just refuse to expect anything. I mean, if we expect a situation to go badly, yeah, we kind of bring that attitude into,
Yeah, a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah, and that's what makes it challenging. And if we're expecting, I mean, I see what you're saying, Nancy, and also if we're expecting the other person to tell us what we want to hear, that can be problematic as well. So we really need to hear what they're actually saying, see what they're actually feeling. And
I guess this was, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, you know, it's hard not to read into something what we're expecting, and we have to be conscientious about that. So as you're going to say, Nancy.
Yeah, just, I think that with some bad interactions that have happened again and again, it's like habitual reactions to each other, so that if you don't do your thing, they won't do their thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when I did this was relatively minor stuff, but it was still interesting that it stopped.
Yeah. Cool. Good.
Yeah. And that gets to another consideration in relationship, which is life is too short to have bad relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, you might not notice that until you get to the last parts of your life. But I can tell you, sitting here as an old guy, that I have no interest in dealing with anybody's bad relationship stuff towards me. It's like if that's the game that they need to play, they can find somebody younger and sprier to play it with. I'm only interested in relating to people who I can have adult relationships with.
And by adult, we're talking about this.
Yeah, this is the real adult relationship.
Yeah. Yep.
As opposed to, this is, yeah, adult as opposed to larval.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Zainab, what do you think?
This point, referring to subject, is actually very interesting. As you mentioned, it hurts the other person if they treat you as an object.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And how it reflects back to them, which is actually interesting. That was the point I didn't notice before. So you could feel the other person treating you as an object, but then they're not feeling well
Mm-hmm.
after
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, very interesting. And then things even get worse then.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because all of the spiritual paths seem to try and find ways to trick you into understanding this. Yeah. How many times have you heard somebody say, see God in everything?
Mm-hmm.
See God in the clouds and the rocks and the little puppy dogs. But most of all, see God in the eyes of your beloved.
I'm even thinking of the golden rule. Like,
Yes.
it's still in all the different ways that they phrase it.
Yeah.
It's all kind of getting at that same thing.
And so, how do you use a primary relationship as a method of spiritual growth? There's a question for you. Anybody have any answers? So I will tell you.
Ilmar just got unmuted. What's up? Did you have
Ilmar,
something to share? Did I put you on the spot?
I was just thinking, I mean, one thing it certainly does is, brings to the forefront all of your, basically your hangups, consequently you have stuff to deal with, which you might not even see outside of that relationship. So,
oh yeah, absolutely. It is easy to be the Buddha on the top of a mountain.
yeah, right.
Be the Buddha when the dishes need doing and the baby is crying.
Yep. Did you have something you wanted to add, Jeff?
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar. When I was single and I was living by myself, I'd go home and everything was fine. I think with friendships, sometimes friends are more forgiving, but when you're in a relationship, it feels different. And so all your, flaws and imperfections, like they're more exposed. And I could just, if I just went around and had no real intimate relationships, just casual relationships, nothing getting deep, I could just stay the way I am and not even realize things about myself that I need to change. And I've always found, like, in any serious relationship that like there was always some friction. And so and those friction points were always things that I learned about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things can be really educational, to say the least.
Oh yes.
Thank you. Zainab, did you have something you wanted to say? No. Okay. Yep. Cool. So I guess you can continue.
Okay, so what we have just been talking about there is the remedial half of this. There's also a generative part. So yes, you get in a relationship with somebody who is really willing to work with you and it's a good, conscious relationship, your crap is going to come up and you get an opportunity to work on your flaws, to work on the things that are in your way. You also, of equal or greater importance, is that you get somebody to support you and you get to support somebody else on the path within the work. You get your beloved going, let me show you the divinity within you reflected in my eyes. And that's better than sitting at the feet of all of the great masters in the world. And you don't get there if you got too much crap in the way. So yeah, you got to get the crap out of the way. But there is this generative thing where your relationship with the other raises you up. We have a few examples of that. Again, let me speak to the life of the Prophet and his first wife, Khadija, who, as far as I'm concerned, in the entire Islamic world, there is no more perfect example of a couple than those two. She was interested in him at first. She was a widow. She was older than him. Some say considerably older, but she was interested in him at first when he was a young man because he was a pretty canny merchant. But it became much, much more than that. And for his entire life with her, she was his anchor, his pole, his place of grounding. And one of his companions asked him once, when you're at home with your wife, what do you do? And he said, I serve my wife, which I found to be a most interesting response. For as long as Khadija was alive, he never took a second wife. That was not even anything that entered into his mind. Afterwards, he got a lot of wives. It was mostly political. It was to make ties between various groups, and because there were a lot of widows who needed support. But that's an entirely different thing. There's also Jesus of Nazareth and Mary Magdalene. And I know there's lots of, that's just a story. Even if it's just a story, and I'm pretty sure it's not just a story. What if they were man and wife? What if they had that kind of relationship? What if she was as profound as the hidden records suggest that she was? What if she was the apostle who Jesus loved the most, as it says in the Gospels? There are hints and intimations that they had this kind of a relationship that was mutually supportive, and that even though the records have been completely obscured, she might have been as great a teacher as he was. Yes, what if? I realize this is all complete heresy, and it's just, nice fantasy books and stuff like that. But I will remind you that in the Gospels, they referred to Jesus as rabbi. And there is no such thing as an unmarried rabbi. You don't get that title unless you're married, because the Jews are smart enough to know that young unmarried men are not stable enough to actually be good spiritual guides. Just a thought. So if he was rabbi, who was his wife?
Hey, Omar, what's up?
Yeah, so much now you've got me all curious now.
Yeah, right.
Were you married, and what was your relationship like?
I was married once when I was very, very young to a very, very wonderful woman. We lived together for 2 years. We stayed married for 10. Though our lives went in very different directions, we remained good friends. We tend to call each other on our anniversary. Yeah, so there was that. I've had good relationships and bad relationships like everybody else. And one thing that I have learned is that I keep my relationship completely private from my public work like this. Because the one time that I didn't do that, it was a disaster.
That makes sense.
But I'm speaking about this stuff from experience, not theory. I will say that.
Yeah, because your initial premise, I don't know if it was a premise or not, that an adult relationship is, if I got it correctly, is one where the ego is out of the way. And the other part of it seemed to be that you're relating to the other person as something with an interior, having, and
yeah, that's so hard to describe, isn't it?
Most relationships are ego relationships.
Yeah.
Very few relations, and some of them work somewhat, and some of them work better. So it's not as if you have to kind of drop the ego completely in order to have a relationship. In fact,
no, I'm not saying that you have to drop the ego at all. Remember, I advocate that you actually need an ego to stay functional on planet Earth.
Yeah, exactly.
But the relationship has to be deeper than that.
Right.
And I have good examples of that in my life. My teacher is married to an absolutely wonderful woman, and she is co-equal with him in spiritual development. Either of them, I consider them both my teachers. And that's something that you see on a fairly regular basis in certain areas of the Sufi world. Not in all of them, but in some. One of my first mentors, he and his wife were married for like almost 70 years. Yeah, and he was my mentor well into his 90s. The example of their relationship is one that I always remember because they were totally different. They had very, very different interests, very, very different spiritual paths, and yet for their entire lives they supported each other. And it wasn't just, leave each other alone. They really supported each other. So I look at that and I go, yeah, that can happen.
Okay, so now that seems to be like an interesting situation to me. Yeah, like, how do they support each other? And because it's not presumably just not simply, but not just by kind of coming from a transcendental position. I mean, as you yourself said, the ego is very much involved in day-to-day life, and a lot of these conflicts are ego conflicts, right? So what's involved in resolving them?
What's involved in resolving them is you have to get beyond your ego. And I used to watch them do this. They would get in discussions about things, some of which would be disagreements. And I would watch them both step beyond wanting to be right about what they thought and wanting to win and all of this kind of stuff, and actually listening to the other person and taking in what the other person said as meaningful. And I never saw them not resolve a problem, which was interesting because they were very different. Trying to think of concrete examples, but nothing is quite coming to mind other than, they had very, very different spiritual paths. His path, he was a Mason, and the Masons were his mystical path. That was it for him. All of his practices revolved around that, and it worked for him. She was a student of Yogananda, a real student of Yogananda, when Yogananda was alive, student of Yogananda. And they couldn't have been more different in their approach. And yet they both had the attitude of, I may not understand exactly how you're doing it, but I will 100% support you in doing that very thing.
But they then probably understood the importance of work, or the importance that work had for both of them. And that was something that they could agree on.
Yes. And that's the reconciling force that we constantly look for.
I guess it's worse when that doesn't occur, when one person has work and the other doesn't, but there's a relationship and it's been lasting for a pretty long time.
Yeah, that can be very, very hard. Because almost inevitably, they will grow apart. And then sometimes the relationship fails, sometimes it doesn't. And I'm minded of a story of one Sufi sheikh who had a wife who everybody agreed was like the most miserable human being you've ever met. And he refused to divorce her. All of his students were like, his students would come over and she would be like rude to them and insult them and insult him and, threaten to throw her shoes at him and all of this kind of stuff. And the students were like, why don't you divorce her? And he said, if I divorced her, nobody else would take her. And she would have nobody to care for her. And I can love the person who she is inside and care for her, and it's fine by me.
And that kind of goes to what you said in the beginning, to see the subject rather than the object.
But in that case, the subject sounds like it's pretty screwed up. Right.
The subject wasn't screwed up. The ego might have been screwed up. She might have been horribly damaged. We don't know the story of her life. He knew the story of her life. Whatever was going on, he found a way to love her in spite of that. And who knows what happened in the end. Maybe that helped her transcend it. I'm not that much of a saint myself. As a matter of fact, I'm not a saint at all. If there's an opposite of saint, that's what I am.
Kyle laughs knowingly.
Kyle does laugh knowingly, yes.
He does his best. Yep. No one needs to be a saint to do their best.
Nope. And sometimes your best is carry one rock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like we talked about
Last night, yeah.
Yep.
So, more thoughts and questions. Have I begun to address this for you? Because this is a subject that we could talk about all night. I usually allot like an hour or so for these talks, and it's never enough time.
Mm. Yeah, I'm feeling like if we need to, I mean, why not? We can revisit this for sure.
Hey, Mushtak.
Yes.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So, wondering if you could talk about kind of the all the elements of kind of creating the chemistry of why we like one person versus someone else, and how do we know if this is just not that physiological kind of just purely sexual cocktail mix that you get inside when you, I don't know, when you're intimate with someone. And because you mentioned like with the prophet who, you know, he had other wives and they were for like political reasons, but then he was really in love with this one.
Yeah, and this is not to say that he wasn't in love with, I know that he was in love with, or loved, I will say unequivocally that he loved deeply all of the women who he took to marriage. And I will say that there were ones who were living with him as his partners that he loved very, very deeply. But that's him. He's a prophet, you know? So we aren't that good.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about the beginning of a new relationship in particular. I know my friends and I call it being on drugs, because that is kind of what it feels like to be on that high of being involved with someone new and seeing all their wonderful qualities and being physically attracted to them.
Yeah, even if they don't have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh boy, the first time that ever happened to me, I was young. I was early 20s, and I met this young lady, and I fell in love with her. It was like somebody injected cocaine directly into my prefrontal lobes. I was like madly, passionately in love with her, and we had for about 6 months this seemingly great relationship that was mostly revolved around being very, very physical with each other. And then one day I woke up and I looked at her and realized that, one, I was no longer in love with her. The chemical cascade that produced those feelings had stopped, because your brain cannot sustain it for all that long. And without that, I didn't even like her that much. We really had nothing in common other than she had a resemblance to an ideal female form for me at some level. And that was pretty much, the relationship did not last beyond that, because once that stops, it never comes back. And it was a shock to me to experience both the depths of the hormonal cascade passion of, quote, being in love, and how it could be turned off like a light switch. And later on, I understood that that's produced by a flood of dopamine and other neurotransmitters hitting the brain. And your brain will actually kill off dopamine receptors if they keep getting flooded like that, so that you need more and more dopamine to get the same high, and you don't get it. So it stops. And then, you know, it will rebuild over a little time and you can do it again. But this has nothing to do with love, and it has nothing to do with relationship. This is just DNA's method of producing more DNA. And this was one of the things that was like a pivotal point for me, realizing that if I was going to have a meaningful relationship with anybody, it had to be something that was beyond that hormonal cascade. And over the years, I learned to not have that hormonal cascade. Even when I meet incredibly beautiful, desirable women, to just not do that, because it makes you stupid. You don't have good judgment, and you can't see them, because that very hormonal cascade makes you see the other as object. Do you understand what I mean by that? You want to possess that.
We're not saying you specifically, but
Yeah.
yes.
I mean,
when
you in the
somebody-
general, in the case of me doing a phenomenological reduction on my states at the time, I was not capable of seeing that young lady as an inwardness. I was experiencing her as an object that I wanted to belong to me and to relate to as an object of my desire. The object of your desire. How often have we heard that? Mm-hmm. She is the object of my desire. I don't want an object of desire. I want a subject of desire. I want to desire the soul of the other person to reveal itself to me. I want to see the angel wings unfold inside of her. Sorry, what happens?
Yeah, so does that...
Kyle's making fun of me again.
Yeah, that's okay.
So, did I hear you correctly that after you realized that, you decided that you wanted to avoid that hormonal cascade?
I wanted to avoid that hormonal cascade at all costs.
Okay, and the way to do that is to not be sexually intimate?
No, absolutely not. What a silly idea. Wash your mouth out with soap for that one.
Good. So how did you do that, though?
Okay, so how you do that is you need a practice. And it's a practice that allows the hormonal response when it happens in the moment, but doesn't allow you to become addicted to it. Mm. That response is addictive. All dopamine responses are addictive. You come to crave them. And so what you have to do is allow the response to be there, but use your practice to let it pass through you very, very quickly so you can see what's on the other side. And for me, it's like, I meet an incredibly gorgeous woman. I breathe. I let the feeling of the response come up. I notice it. I go, this has nothing to do with her as a human being. This is just my chemicals. And I breathe some more, and I steady myself, and I do my practice, and I do my remembrance, and I observe the person and look for her inwardness. That's the biggest thing, is look for her inwardness. See if you can see who she is beyond the physical desire for her. Imagine her, and this is one that I like to do, is I imagine the person who I am having that response with when they're 90. And that tells me Is this something that is beyond mere physicality? Because if I'm looking at her and seeing her as a 90-year-old and I'm still going, wow, it's fun to hang out with her, then it's probably not just hormones.
Does that help?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yay, cool. Yeah, I think the most important thing is recognizing that it can still come up. It's just it becomes easier to know how to respond to it and not let it dictate your behavior.
Yeah, you don't have to buy into it as real.
Yeah.
And then it's just, it becomes spice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you don't let it control you.
This is probably one of the more frank and interesting talks that we've had on a Sunday. David, you're so quiet. Say something.
Always. I think I'd like to go back to Mustakim's question about staying or leaving relationships and why people might choose one or the other, and going more in depth about that.
I can speak for myself on this, and what I advise people is if the other person is treating you with contempt, you need to leave the relationship. That I cannot say more bluntly. This, when I was doing a lot of couples counseling back in the day, that was one of the first things that I checked for, is one partner treating the other partner with contempt. Because if they are, there is almost undoubtedly no help for the relationship.
What is contempt rather than just treating someone like an object?
Contempt is treating someone like an object that has had dog shit smeared on it.
Gotcha.
It's hard to describe. You know it when you see it. You see it in the person's expression. And contempt is interesting because contempt has its own expression. It's biological in nature, and it is the only asymmetrical expression. Look at Dick Cheney's expressions, pictures of him on the news, because he was often holding everybody around him in complete contempt, and he had that, you know, one,
Like
I can't even do it.
It's like a sneer, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a sneering sort of thing. And it is, not only do you not matter, but you are dirt beneath my feet. You suck. There is nothing worthwhile about you.
I can't stand you. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's one thing. So make sure that your partner is not treating you with contempt. Make sure that you're not treating them with contempt. If you're treating your partner with contempt, if you belittle everything that they do, you don't deserve that person.
Yes, Nancy says, you know, contempt is like treating someone like an unsatisfactory object.
Yeah, that's well put.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep, thanks. Okay, so continue. Sorry about that.
So now, that's the most extreme. After that comes, is one of you working on themselves and the other completely content to be where they are?
That's also tough.
That's also tough. That's not as tough as contempt, but again, it's very hard to maintain the relationship. And I've seen people do it for the sake of the kids.
Yeah.
I was involved with somebody who was who was married. She had 2 kids with the guy. They stayed married up until the day after their youngest child's 18th birthday, and then she filed for divorce. And, you know, people do that. And it wasn't so much even that, I mean, she didn't hate her ex. Her ex was a perfectly fine human being. I knew both of them. But they had grown so far apart because she had been doing some work on herself and he had not. So that's the next thing. Do you have a path that is mutually supportive of each other's work? If that is a yes, then no matter how hard things are, you can probably maintain a relationship for a very long time. Now, if you have a path that is compatible with your partner, things get a lot more fun because then there's a lot more support. And if you and your partner are on the same sort of path, then that's about as good as it gets, in my experience. The other thing is, and I cannot stress this enough, a real relationship is horizontal, not vertical. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Equals.
Equals. You cannot have a real relationship with somebody who you do not regard as an equal and who does not regard you as an equal. It is not possible. Do you know why? This is a trick question. The answer is, in that kind of relationship, in a vertical relationship, nobody tells the other the truth. The person who is in the beta position will tell the person in the alpha position what they think they want them to hear, what they think they want to hear, not what they actually believe, because if the person is in the alpha position, they have some control over you. The person in the alpha position never gets to hear the truth, so they act on what is being told them, which is just a looping feedback of what they already want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get any growth, you get the opposite of that. So as painful as it can be for some people, if you want a real relationship, it has to be horizontal. You cannot have a real relationship with a person who you do not regard as an equal and you do not treat as an equal. And that may be one of the great secret keys to relationship right there. And it is your job to raise that other person up to you as an equal and to raise yourself up to them as an equal.
And vice versa.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say is
Yeah.
That's the vice versa thing.
Yeah. You're both doing that work too.
Yes, you're both doing that work and you're both doing that work for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard because there are so few cultures left where you have that kind of equality between people.
Yeah. Did we have a question or a remark? I noticed that some people are unmuted.
Yes, lay it on us.
I guess not. Okay.
Okay. So that's basically what I have to say about relationship in the spiritual path. To sum up, the absolute best quality of spiritual path that I know of personally is that when you are in relationship with your beloved who is walking the path with you, and you can mutually support each other on that. It is also incredibly cool to have deep connections with friends who are on the path or are on the same sort of path with you. And then it's great to have great connections with friends who are on their own path, whether it looks like yours or not.
Yep.
the unifying factor in all of these, though, is that you are connecting with people who you see as subject and who see you as subject, and you create intersubjectivity. And then you'll still have problems, but they'll be more fun. And you'll solve them and get better problems.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts?
Thoughts, feelings, opinions, questions?
Jeff?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. That was very, I don't know. I listened to a lot of things and read books, people about relationships. It's a topic that is always interesting and fascinating and mysterious and all that stuff to me. Yeah, and I guess I haven't heard everything because I definitely got some new things today.
Well, trust me, I haven't heard everything yet either.
Right. But I mean, that is awesome to hear, and I'm glad that you benefited from being here.
Yeah. And stop being such a stranger. Jeff only lives like an hour from me. Do I ever see him? No. He's off doing all of this important stuff.
Getting your spot blown up, Jeff.
Yeah. So come visit. I'd love to see you. Vince would love to see you. The dog would love to see you.
Yeah.
Yay.
You might see me more. I actually, I met someone in nearby in Alameda.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, that's, yeah. Come, bring her over to the house. We'll embarrass you in front of her.
I
We'll
want to
tell her all of your secrets.
I'd love to do that, actually.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yay.
Or,
yeah, I mean,
yeah, we can meet in Alameda too, which is much more fun.
And I'm sure we can all find ways to bring learnings like this into any relationships we have that are really important to us. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? All right, well then I'm going to stop the recording. But before I do, it's time for the commercial.
Yep.
So here's the thing. We now have something new, which is you can talk with me. You can have one-on-one direct spiritual counseling or whatever the hell you want to call it, or at least fun conversations. And I am still running my special of 6 hours at half price. So instead of $100 an hour, $50 an hour, for people to try it out and see if they like it. And even better than that is Kyle now has room for new clients as well.
Yes.
And she is running the same special.
Yep.
And I will tell you, she's even cooler than I am.
I know I seem quiet on these talks, but I think that one-on-one is where I really feel like I come into my element.
Yep. And she's promised me that she's going to be less quiet on these talks. As a matter of fact, sometime soon she's going to be leading something.
Where
I'm going to be sitting here typing in the words and reading the comments to you.
Yeah.
Because that's just how we roll.
Mm-hmm. Teamwork.
But you can get a series of 6 one-hour sessions with Kyle at the special introductory price of $50 a session, $300 paid in advance. That's the deal.
Yeah.
Not hour by hour, but pay it up. And I will tell you that she will give you as good a guidance as you will ever get. Kyle, don't listen to this. She's the best student I've ever trained. She's amazingly good. And she has not been my student for a while now. She just pretends to be for the look of the thing or something.
Stealthy.
Yeah, stealthy. But she has completely graduated. So you can do that. And you can do that with me. And I'm relatively amusing. And we have launching sometime this coming up week. We are going to have the 3 forces and 6 processes class that we did, the secret class that we did for all of you peoples who were in it. And we're making it public for a very, very small fee so that more people can learn it.
Yep.
And the Enneagram class that we did is also going to be launching again for a very small fee.
Yeah, that'll be following the release.
Yeah,
of
following the release, we're just kind of
courses. Yep.
Yeah. And then we have new classes coming up in the summer and fall, which you will be hearing about soon. And general shenanigans. There will be general shenanigans. So hang out, find out about this stuff. If you haven't joined the forum, join the forum because things happen there. We don't know what, but they happen. And we will see you next week.